The world watched in horror as Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The images of tanks rolling through cities and explosions lighting up the sky were broadcast globally, leaving millions in shock. Beyond the immediate devastation and loss of life, the conflict quickly morphed into a global crisis, affecting not just the people of Ukraine, but rippling out to touch lives across continents, with shockwaves felt far beyond Ukraine's borders. The international community responded with protests, sanctions, and a flurry of diplomatic activity, but the impacts were far-reaching and complex. One of the most alarming aspects of this conflict has been Russia's cynical weaponization of food, turning a vital resource into a tool of war and geopolitical manipulation. This tactic has exacerbated an already dire situation, creating a new front in the war that targets the most vulnerable. At the heart of this crisis lies Ukraine, a nation known as the breadbasket of Europe for its fertile lands and role as a major global exporter of grain, particularly wheat. Ukraine's rich soil and favorable climate have made it a cornerstone of global food security. Russia, from the outset of its invasion, has strategically targeted Ukraine's agricultural sector. This has included the destruction of grain storage facilities, which are crucial for maintaining the supply chain and ensuring that harvested grain reaches the market, the theft of farm equipment, which has crippled the ability of Ukrainian farmers to plant and harvest crops, and the relentless shelling of fields ready for harvest. These actions are not just attacks on infrastructure, but on the very lifeblood of the nation. The message was clear: cripple Ukraine's ability to feed itself and the world, creating a ripple effect that would destabilize global food markets. And in doing so, sow chaos and instability far beyond the battlefield. The repercussions of these actions have been felt in markets and homes around the world. This deliberate targeting of a nation's ability to feed itself and others is a grave violation of international law and a blatant attack on global food security. International bodies have condemned these actions, but the damage continues to mount. The consequences of Russia's actions have been swift and devastating. Families are struggling to find enough to eat, and the humanitarian crisis is deepening. Ukraine, once a reliable source of wheat for millions around the globe, has seen its exports plummet. Ships that once carried grain to far-off lands now sit empty in deserted ports. The Black Sea, a vital waterway for Ukrainian grain shipments, has been blockaded by Russian warships, effectively cutting off a lifeline of food to the world. This blockade has not only strangled Ukraine's economy, but also created a dire shortage in the global food supply. This blockade has created a bottleneck in the global food supply chain, causing disruptions that have sent shockwaves through markets worldwide, sending prices soaring and pushing millions to the brink of starvation. The cost of basic staples has skyrocketed, making it difficult for families to afford even the most essential items. The weaponization of food is not a new tactic in warfare, but Russia's actions in Ukraine represent a chilling escalation. This is a calculated move to use hunger as a weapon, a tactic that has been seen throughout history, but rarely on such a global scale. This is not just about starving a nation into submission, it is about creating a humanitarian crisis that extends far beyond Ukraine's borders. It is about wielding hunger as a weapon on a global scale, holding the world hostage in a cynical power play. The international community must recognize this for what it is, a crime against humanity, and respond with unwavering resolve to hold Russia accountable. This is not just a regional conflict, it is a global crisis that demands a unified and decisive response, and respond with unwavering resolve to hold Russia accountable and mitigate the devastating humanitarian consequences. The world must come together to ensure that such tactics are condemned and prevented in the future, and mitigate the devastating humanitarian consequences. The international community must act swiftly to provide aid and support to those affected, ensuring that the most vulnerable are not left to suffer. Russia's war on Ukraine is not just a territorial conflict, it's a calculated assault on global food security. The ramifications of this conflict extend far beyond the borders of these two nations, affecting millions of people worldwide. By crippling Ukraine's agricultural sector and blockading its ports, Russia has effectively choked off one of the world's most vital food supplies. Russia has deliberately engineered a food crisis with far-reaching consequences. This is not an unintended side effect of war, it is a strategic move designed to destabilize global food markets. This crisis is felt most acutely in countries heavily dependent on Ukrainian grain, particularly in the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia. These regions are now grappling with severe food shortages and skyrocketing prices. Before the war, Ukraine was a major supplier of wheat, corn, and sunflower oil to the global market. Its agricultural exports were a lifeline for many nations. Its fertile lands and efficient agricultural practices made it a reliable source of sustenance for millions. The country's ability to produce high yields of essential crops was unmatched. However, Russia's invasion has disrupted this delicate balance, throwing the global food system into disarray. The destruction of infrastructure and the displacement of farmers have crippled Ukraine's ability to produce and export food. The sudden loss of Ukrainian grain has sent shockwaves through international markets, leading to price volatility and shortages. The ripple effects are being felt in every corner of the globe. The consequences of this manufactured food crisis are dire. Millions of people are now facing hunger and malnutrition as a direct result of these actions. Countries already grappling with poverty, conflict, and climate change are now facing a perfect storm of hunger and instability. The compounded crises are pushing vulnerable populations to the brink. The World Food Programme has warned that millions are at risk of starvation as a direct result of Russia's actions. The organization is struggling to meet the increased demand for food aid. The situation is particularly precarious in countries like Yemen, Somalia, and South Sudan, which were already facing severe food insecurity before the war in Ukraine. The additional strain has exacerbated existing humanitarian crises. This deliberate targeting of global food security is a moral outrage and a blatant violation of international law. It is an attack on the fundamental human right to food. Russia's actions are not just an attack on Ukraine, they are an attack on the most vulnerable people around the world, who rely on the stability of the global food system for their survival. The humanitarian impact is profound and far-reaching. The international community must act swiftly and decisively to hold Russia accountable for its actions and to mitigate the devastating humanitarian consequences of this manufactured food crisis. Coordinated global efforts are essential to restore stability and ensure that food reaches those in desperate need. The impact of Russia's war on Ukraine's agricultural sector is being felt far beyond Europe, affecting global food security and economies. Developing countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia are bearing the brunt of the crisis, with millions of people facing food shortages and rising prices. These regions have long relied on Ukraine and Russia for a significant portion of their wheat imports, which are essential for their daily sustenance and economic stability. The disruption to this vital supply chain has had devastating consequences, leading to empty grain storage facilities and cargo ships stuck in ports, unable to deliver their precious cargo. Countries like Lebanon, Yemen, and Somalia, already grappling with political instability and humanitarian crises, are now facing a catastrophic food emergency, with millions at risk of starvation. The soaring prices of wheat, a staple food in many of these nations, have pushed millions further into poverty and hunger, exacerbating existing inequalities and creating new challenges for aid organizations. The situation is particularly dire in Lebanon, where the World Bank estimates that over half the population is now living below the poverty line, struggling to afford even basic necessities. The impact of the crisis extends beyond immediate hunger, affecting long-term health and development, particularly for children who are most vulnerable to malnutrition. The rising cost of food has fueled social unrest and instability in several countries as people take to the streets to demand affordable food and better living conditions. Protests have erupted in countries like Sri Lanka and Pakistan, where citizens are struggling to afford basic necessities, leading to increased tensions and potential for conflict. The World Bank has warned that the war in Ukraine could push an additional 10 million people into poverty in the coming months, exacerbating existing inequalities and threatening global stability as more people fall into the cycle of poverty and hunger. The disruption to global food supply chains also has long-term implications for food security as countries struggle to find alternative sources and rebuild their supply networks. The war has highlighted the fragility of a globalized food system heavily reliant on a few key exporters, underscoring the need for more resilient and diversified food supply chains. It has underscored the urgent need for greater diversification of food sources and for strengthening local food production capacity, particularly in vulnerable regions, to ensure long-term food security and resilience against future crises. Few countries exemplify the global reach of Russia's weaponization of food more than Egypt. As one of the world's largest wheat importers, Egypt has long relied on the steady flow of grain from the Black Sea region, with Ukraine and Russia being its primary suppliers. The war in Ukraine has shattered this lifeline, plunging Egypt into a food crisis that threatens its stability and the livelihoods of millions. For decades, subsidized bread has been a cornerstone of social stability in Egypt, providing an essential source of sustenance for millions. The availability of affordable bread has been crucial for maintaining social peace in a country grappling with poverty and inequality. However, the war in Ukraine and Russia's cynical manipulation of global grain supplies has put this delicate social contract at risk. The sudden surge in wheat prices has forced the Egyptian government to contend with an impossible dilemma: cut back on vital bread subsidies, risking social unrest, or shoulder the crippling cost of maintaining them, further straining an already fragile economy. This crisis has exposed the vulnerability of a nation heavily reliant on external sources for its food security. Egypt's plight is a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the global food system and the far-reaching consequences of conflict. It underscores the urgent need for a coordinated global response to address the root causes of food insecurity and to build more resilient and equitable food systems that can withstand future shocks.
So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's turn the page on a new adventure together. Get ready to experience books like never before, only on VBook 360. Like, comment, and share to support the channel and keep the video magic alive. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, every video has a story, and every story deserves to be shared. See you in the next video.